In the Arkansas Ozark Mountains, in 1908, where old hollows swallow sound and secrets grow in the dark, two families lived. Their fates would meet in the most shocking way possible. The story I'm going to tell is about the most trusted hunting guide in Newton County, a church-going man who knew every hidden trail and cave for 20 miles. It also includes the most hated outcasts in the area, who were shunned by all decent people as the mountain's most inbred family. He thought his darkest secret was safe when he left his pregnant 6-year-old daughter with these social parasites. But what happened next in that lonely hollow went against everything we thought we knew about good and evil. The family that everyone was afraid of would turn out to be unlikely heroes, and the man that everyone trusted hid terrible things that even experienced police officers wouldn't talk about for decades. What made a father do such horrible things? And what did the outcasts learn that made them tools of justice? Get ready for what's coming next. The truth will make you question everything you think you know about how people are. Sheriff Caleb Morrison had seen a lot of bad things happen in the mountains during his 7 years of keeping the peace in Newton County. But nothing could have prepared him for what he found at the Crenshaw homestead on that cold December morning in 1908. Deacon Hartwell asked for the routine wellness check after Ezekiel Harmon said that his 6-year-old daughter Mercy had run off with a traveling preacher the week before Christmas. Morrison knew the Crenshaw family's reputation. They were 5 generations of mountain people who decent people whispered about as the county's most inbred clan. Arkansas law said that even outcasts should be safe. The sheriff's boots crunched through snow that was up to his ankles as he walked toward the rundown cabin. The only sign of life in the empty hollow was the smoke coming from the chimney. Tobias Crenshaw, the head of the family, came out before Morrison could knock. His weathered face was serious and determined. "Sheriff, you'll want to see what's inside," Crenshaw said, his voice having an educated tone that went against everything people thought about mountain degenerates. "That hunting guide of yours brought us more than just game." Morrison found Mercy Harmon huddled near the fire inside the cabin, her belly swollen with advanced pregnancy and her lips still blue from being outside in the cold for too long. Morrison's stomach turned at the sight of the girl's ripped dress, which told a story of violence. Dark stains on the fabric that Crenshaw's wife had carefully kept, even though her family was very poor. Her dad dropped her off like unwanted livestock, and she was wearing these bloody rags, Tobias said, pulling out a bundle wrapped in clean cloth. Said she was a burden he couldn't bear anymore, and that we should use her however we wanted. Morrison's trained eye cataloged evidence, even as his heart broke. There were tears in the dress that looked like they were forced to come out, and the bloodstains had patterns that looked like they were from long-term abuse rather than just one violent incident. Dr. Samuel Finch got there within an hour. His medical exam showed horrible things that would later fill 23 pages of court testimony. Morrison kept the doctor's first notes in his case files. They were written in a frantic style and showed physical proof of years of systematic sexual abuse. Finch whispered to the sheriff, "This child has been through things that no one should have to go through." His voice shook with professional anger. The scarring shows that she was attacked many times, starting when she was only 14 years old. Mercy's own whispered confession, which she made between shivers, revealed that her father had been coming to her bed since her mother's death in 1904. Tobias Crenshaw's detailed written account of Zeke Harmon's delivery speech contradicted everything the hunting guide had told people in the area. The mountain man was surprisingly well read, and he wrote down 3 pages of exact quotes that would later be very important in court. He said she was ruined goods that no decent man would want. Crenshaw read from his carefully documented notes. He said she'd been corrupted by sin and that our family was appropriate company for damaged merchandise. The accuracy of Crenshaw's notes made Morrison think that this wasn't the first time he'd seen and like such abandonment, which sent ice through Morrison's veins. The sheriff's investigation into Zeke's claims about a traveling preacher quickly fell apart when it was looked at more closely. According to church records, there were no visiting ministers in Newton County in December. Deacon Hartwell's wife remembered Zeke asking strange questions about hiding shameful pregnancies at social events the month before. He wanted to know about homes for unwed mothers in Little Rock, she said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. He asked specific questions about whether such places kept records or contacted families. Morrison's growing suspicion that Zeke had planned to leave Mercy for weeks was confirmed when store owner Williams showed receipts showing that the hunting guide had been buying women's monthly supplies consistently for over 2 years, things that no bachelor should need. The most scary thing Tobias Crenshaw said was that Mercy wasn't the first pregnant girl to be left in their hollow. His family's isolation had made them unwilling witnesses to a pattern of abandonment that had been going on for almost 10 years. 3 other girls have come to us over the years, Crenshaw said, his hand shaking as he spoke. All of them said their dads told people they would run away with men, and they all showed signs of the same kind of abuse we've seen in Mercy. Morrison's careful notes showed that at least 7 families in the county had said that their daughters had run away with mysterious suitors. This happened while Zeke Harmon was leading hunting parties through the remote mountains where bodies could disappear forever. As the snow kept falling outside the Crenshaw cabin in December, Sheriff Morrison had to face the awful truth that the most trusted person in Newton County might also be the most dangerous. The evidence he was gathering in his investigation notes showed that there was systematic abuse hidden behind a facade of religious respectability. The most hated outcasts in the community held the key to exposing decades of hidden evil. Morrison's last entry that night showed how ironic his investigation had become. The family everyone was afraid of had become protectors of the innocent, while the man everyone trusted hid horrors that would soon need the full force of mountain justice. In January 1909, Sheriff Morrison turned the basement of the Newton County Courthouse into a makeshift evidence room. The stone walls were covered with testimony that would show the most systematic pattern of abuse in Arkansas legal history. Mercy Harmon's recovery in the Crenshaw Hollow gave her the strength to speak, and her 15-page signed confession told the story of 3 years of nightly terror that started the week after her mother's funeral. He said Mama's death was God's way of making me his wife, she wrote in careful script, which Morrison kept in his case files. He told me it was my Christian duty to comfort him in his grief, and then he used scripture about children obeying their fathers to explain what he had done to my body. Dr. Finch's more thorough medical exam found proof that backed up every horrible thing Mercy said. His clinical notes showed scarring patterns that were consistent with repeated sexual trauma that had started about 3 years earlier when the girl was only 13 years old. The doctor's most damning discovery came when she looked at tissue samples under a microscope and saw that the girl had syphilis, which is medical proof that she had sexual contact with an adult, which could only have come from her father. Finch wrote in his official report, "The infection's progression shows that exposure began in early 1906. During the relevant time frame, no other adult male was able to get to this isolated child." The formal interviews with the Crenshaw family led to testimony that made Zeke Harmon look like a predator who used his hunting trips as a cover for stalking vulnerable girls all over the county. The oldest son of Tobias Crenshaw said that they had seen Zeke looking for remote farms where young women lived with sick or old parents. In sworn testimony, the witness said, he'd ask detailed questions about families with pretty daughters, especially ones without strong men to protect them. His mother gave scary details about Zeke's behavior during the last 3 deliveries of pregnant girls, such as how he told them to keep the victims alone until after they gave birth. Morrison looked at church records and saw a pattern of charitable work that now seemed suspicious in light of the new evidence. The Methodist archives showed that Zeke had volunteered for youth ministries that helped girls who were having problems and had asked for private counseling sessions with families who were having trouble with their daughters. Deacon Hartwell's unwilling testimony said that he had heard complaints about Zeke's too personal interest in teenage girls, but he had ignored them because they were just jealous gossip from less godly men. Hartwell said, "He quoted scripture so easily that I thought he was honest, his voice breaking with shame. I told worried parents that Christian charity meant trusting good people." The investigation took a turn for the worse when Morrison found physical evidence hidden in Mercy's old bedroom at Zeke's cabin. Investigators found diary entries written on scraps of cloth with berry juice ink sewn into the lining of her mattress. These entries listed specific dates and details of her father's attacks. January 15th, he said, "Mama would be proud of how I'm serving the family." This entry made even the most experienced deputies cry. Another part showed Zeke's sick religious reasons. He reads from Genesis about daughters serving their fathers before God gives them husbands. The hidden diary showed that Mercy's abuse wasn't random violence, but planned. Systematic exploitation that her father had convinced her was God's will. The store ledger records gave more proof that Zeke had been carefully handling his daughter's abuse. Williams General Store receipts showed that women bought sanitary supplies every month for 2 years, and the amounts were much more than what a single man would need for his household staff or charity. The timing of these purchases matched the time when Mercy was being abused, and they stopped all of a sudden in November, which was when she was obviously pregnant. Morrison wrote in his report that he was tracking her cycles like livestock breeding. Every purchase was planned to keep him in control and avoid getting pregnant until he lost control. The most heartbreaking testimony came from Zeke's surviving children, who said that Mercy wasn't the first person he killed in their own home. Under oath, his 4-year-old son said that their father had been going to their older sister's bed for months before she died of a mysterious illness in 1907. She got really sick after she started fighting him, the boy told Morrison in a private interview. She threw up every morning and wouldn't eat anything. Then she just wasted away like she was poisoned. Doctor. Finch looked at the sister's death certificate and saw signs that were consistent with pregnancy problems or intentional poisoning with easily available mountain plants. As Zeke started spreading false accusations to protect his reputation, the community began to resist the investigation. He told people who wanted to hunt that the Crenshaw family had corrupted his innocent daughter and that Mercy was lying to get out of being punished for cheating. Several well-known people who relied on Zeke's guiding services spoke out in public to defend him, saying that immoral mountain people were trying to ruin a good Christian man. Judge McKinn, who was a client of Zeke's hunting trips, privately told Morrison to handle this delicate matter with appropriate discretion so that the community wouldn't be shocked. Sheriff Morrison had a terrible realization as the snow from January turned into mud in February. The evidence against Newton County's most trusted citizen was too strong, but the community's bias against his key witnesses could have let a monster get away with murder. The same isolation that had helped Zeke commit crimes for years now worked in his favor, as respectable society would not believe testimony from the county's most hated family. Morrison's last case notes from January show how desperate he was getting. Truth stands before us in bloody rags and signed confessions. Yet justice may die because evil wore a Sunday suit, while virtue lived in a mountain hollow. February brought political pressure that could have stopped the investigation, as well as Ozark Snowhide's mountain graves. In a coordinated effort, church elders went to Morrison's office, each bringing the same message wrapped in religious language about protecting the community's reputation and handling delicate matters through Christian forgiveness. Elder Thompson's barely veiled threat made the stakes clear. Sheriff, righteous men shouldn't see their good works destroyed by testimony from degenerates who'd say anything for attention. Morrison's private notes recorded how Deacon Hartwell admitted the Methodist leadership had done religious, voted to discourage further investigation that might scandalize God-fearing families with sordid details. Morrison felt even more pressure when he found out that Zeke's hunting clients included the very men who were in charge of prosecuting his crimes. In 1908, County Prosecutor James Ellis paid Zeke a lot of money to take him on 3 expensive hunting trips. He paid extra to have exclusive access to trophy deer grounds. Later, through state intervention, Judge McKinn's financial records were subpoenaed. They showed that he had put money into Zeke's plan to open a commercial hunting lodge, which created conflicts of interest that made it impossible to prosecute him fairly. Morrison wrote a frustrated letter to the state attorney general's office saying they're more concerned with protecting their hunting seasons than getting justice for murdered children. The community's power structure was scared by Tobias Crenshaw's revelation about his documentation efforts, which changed the investigation's foundation in ways that scared them. His detailed journals, which were written in surprisingly beautiful handwriting, had 340 pages of careful notes going back 7 years. "I've been watching and writing down everything I've seen," Crenshaw told Morrison, handing over leather-bound books that showed patterns of strange behavior all over the county. His entries included exact dates of when young women went missing, detailed descriptions of Zeke's behavior at community events, and disturbing quotes from conversations that the hunting guide didn't know were being recorded by a mountain man who was supposed to be illiterate. With Crenshaw's help, Morrison found physical evidence that gave him the breakthrough he needed to get past community opposition. Investigators used places that Tobias wrote about in his journals to find a cache buried under a fallen oak tree near Zeke's cabin. The cache contained hair ribbons, small pieces of jewelry, and scraps of clothing that grieving families would later identify as belonging to their missing daughters. Dr. Finch's study of the buried items showed that they had been buried for different amounts of time, with some being there for as long as 5 years. This showed that they were part of a planned collection, which went against any claims that they were found by chance. The most terrifying thing they found was a Sunday dress for a girl named Mary Sullivan. It was carefully folded and wrapped in oilcloth. Her family had been told in 1905 that she had run away with a traveling merchant. 3 desperate families finally broke the silence in the community when they admitted where their daughters really were after years of pretending they had run away. The Hendersons said that their daughter Sarah had last been seen accepting Zeke's offer to help her find a job in Little Rock. The Walsh family said that their daughter had gone missing after Zeke promised to help her get to Memphis to see her family. "We were ashamed to admit we'd trusted a man who made our daughters vanish," Mrs. Henderson sobbed during her formal testimony. The statement from her husband was very important for the timeline. Zeke told us Sarah was working as a seamstress in the city and even showed us letters he said she had sent, but we never heard her voice again. Dr. Finch's larger medical investigation found proof that would make prosecution unavoidable, even though politics got in the way. The lab tests on Mercy's blood samples showed that she had advanced syphilis, which could only have come from sexual contact with an adult. This was clear proof of the abuse she had described in her testimony. As the doctor became more skilled in forensic medicine, he dug up the body of Zeke's daughter, who died in 1907 under mysterious circumstances. He found traces of mountain laurel poison in preserved tissue samples. Finch wrote in his extra report, "Someone who knew a lot about poisonous plants gave a deadly dose on purpose. The victim was about 4 months pregnant when she died." Zeke's realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling led him to make more and more desperate attempts to silence possible witnesses. With his hunting rifle in hand, he showed up at the Crenshaw homestead on February 23rd and made threats that Tobias wrote down word for word in his journal just hours after the fight. Crenshaw wrote down Zeke's exact words about how mountain people die in hunting accidents, and nobody asks questions. He said we'd all meet unfortunate accidents if we kept spreading lies about a Christian man. The hunting guide's threats were believable because he knew a lot about remote places where bodies could never be found. Again, this was especially true because there was more and more evidence of murders he had committed without being punished. When Prosecutor Ellis officially said he wasn't going to file charges because there wasn't enough credible evidence from reliable witnesses, community corruption reached its peak. His public statement, which is still in the records of Newton County, dismissed the Crenshaw testimony as lies from a family known for being mentally ill and morally corrupt. Judge McKinn backed this choice by saying that physical evidence found through tainted sources could not be used in court. Morrison's angry response, which was recorded in official letters, said that both men were protecting a child killer to keep their hunting rights and social status. Tobias Crenshaw's realization that traditional methods would never hold Zeke accountable for his crimes became clear when the legal system failed to do so. His last journal entry from February ended with a grim determination. Law won't touch him because he wears nice clothes to church and guides rich men's hunting. But mountain justice doesn't care about Sunday suits or political connections. Some debts can't be paid off or hidden. As winter storms cut off the hollow deeper in the mountain shadows, the Crenshaw family started to plan ways to make Zeke's guilt impossible to deny or ignore. They wanted to make sure that justice would find its own way when the legal system failed its most vulnerable citizens. March came with unseasonably warm weather that melted snow into dangerous mountain streams. This made it the perfect time for Tobias Crenshaw's carefully planned plan to get justice from a system that had let down its most vulnerable citizens. The Crenshaws sent a message through Deacon Hartwell that the mountain girl wanted to make peace and talked about how she would stay quiet about the misunderstanding with her father. Zeke's answer showed that he was a predator who thought he was untouchable because of his status in the community. He agreed to meet at the Crenshaw Hollow on March 15th. He brought his rifle and thought he could scare the family into never talking about crimes that he thought corrupt officials would never prosecute. The hunting guide's confidence went away as soon as he stepped into the Crenshaw cabin and saw not scared mountain degenerates, but a well-organized family that had planned for this fight with military precision. Tobias's sons had set themselves up in strategic places around the room, and the patriarch himself sat calmly at a table full of papers that made Zeke's face go pale. Tobias said in a clear, educated voice that cut through Zeke's stammered denials, "We have all the proof we need to see you hang." 3 generations of Crenshaw men overpowered the hunting guide before he could raise his weapon. They did it with a practiced efficiency that showed they had carefully planned and were determined to win. For the next 5 days, Zeke was kept in the damp stone root cellar under the Crenshaw's storage shed. Mountain Justice would get confessions that the legal system was too corrupt or cowardly to get. Tobias started keeping careful records right away, writing down every conversation, threat, and admission that the captive predator made. The first entry in what would become 47 pages of handwritten testimony said, Day 1. Subject denies all charges but admits to disciplining his daughter for womanly sins. The Crenshaws used a systematic method that included taking pictures of physical evidence with a camera they borrowed from Dr. Finch. This created visual records that would be impossible to ignore in any future legal proceedings. Zeke's mental breakdown got worse when he saw physical proof that he thought was safely hidden or destroyed. The hair ribbons and jewelry found near his cabin forced families of victims to admit that they had spent years thinking their loved ones had just run away to faraway cities. "Mary Sullivan fought me too hard," he cried on the second day of his captivity. Tobias carefully wrote down his words. "Had to use the mountain laurel tea like I done with my own girl when she started threatening to tell church folks." Each confession revealed new victims and extended the timeline of systematic abuse, which had been going on for 12 years, far beyond what Morrison's investigation had found. The most terrifying things came to light when Zeke's desperation drove him to use twisted religious ideas to justify his crimes. This showed how deeply disturbed he was mentally. His long, incoherent explanations, which Tobias carefully wrote down word for word, revealed complicated grooming techniques that had allowed him to prey on people in the isolated mountain community for years without anyone noticing. Zeke said on the 3rd day of his confinement, "God gave me power over kids who needed help. Because their parents didn't protect them properly, I gave them the discipline they needed." His detailed descriptions of how he had convinced vulnerable girls that sexual abuse was divine punishment for their sins showed that he had planned to manipulate them in a way that even experienced church leaders had fallen for. Zeke was forced to tell the Crenshaws where to find buried evidence under threat of being locked up for good. His directions led them to find physical proof that turned suspicions into facts. Using his scared directions, they found 2 shallow graves on his property that held the bodies of girls from nearby counties who had been reported missing. Finding personal items buried with the bodies, like lockets, hair combs, and pieces of unique fabric, gave police hard proof that Zeke was involved in murders that they had never linked to his hunting trips. Tobias's careful listing of each find made an evidence list that would meet even the strictest legal standards. The predator's most damning admissions were about his trophy collection. Locks of hair and small personal items he'd kept as souvenirs of his victims, which he kept in a metal box buried under the floorboards of his cabin. Zeke gave his captors detailed accounts of how he chose each memento and the specific memories they held of his crimes while they were putting him under a lot of stress. He said, on the 4th day, his voice breaking with exhaustion, "The blonde curls belonged to the Henderson girl. Kept them to remember how she begged before I used the rope." These horrible details, written down in Tobias's increasingly grim handwriting, showed that he had planned the murders, which would lead to death sentences once the right people got their hands on the confessions. Zeke's complete mental breakdown on the 5th day of his captivity led to the longest criminal confession in Arkansas history. It was 17 handwritten pages long and included specific dates, places, and methods for 7 murders that took place over 12 years. His signature on each page, which was seen by several members of the Crenshaw family, made a legal document that could stand up to any claims of coercion or reliability. The hunting guide's desperate attempts to bargain for his release by revealing more burial sites only made the case against him stronger. Each new location provided more proof of a systematic predation that had gone on without punishment because of community respect and official corruption. The Crenshaws set their captive free on March 20 and took him right away to Sheriff Morrison's office, where they handed over both the broken predator and a huge amount of documented evidence that made it impossible for anyone to deny what had happened. Zeke's look, hollow-eyed, shaking, and holding the confessions he had been forced to write, was proof of the mountain justice that the legal system had failed to provide. Morrison's case notes said he was amazed at how well the Crenshaws had documented everything. The evidence was so complete that prosecution was unavoidable, no matter how much political pressure or community resistance there was to admitting the truth about their most trusted citizens' horrible crimes. On the 22nd of April 1909, the trial of Ezekiel Harmon began in a Newton County courthouse full of people who had spent months denying that their most trusted hunting guide could be a child killer. When State Attorney General Williams showed up with a team of prosecutors and 890 pages of evidence, Judge McKinn's efforts to keep the case quiet fell apart. The evidence turned a local scandal into a landmark case for Arkansas justice. Zeke's 17-page handwritten confession, which was clearly visible on the prosecution table, made people gasp in horror because they recognized his unique handwriting from church donation records and hunting contracts they had signed in good faith. Dr. Finch's medical testimony gave scientific support to accusations that defense lawyers had hoped to dismiss as family feuds and mountain folklore. His detailed presentation included pictures of physical evidence found in the graves, forensic analysis of tissue samples that proved deliberate poisoning, and medical records of systematic sexual abuse that lasted for 12 years and involved multiple victims. Finch said, "The defendant's own words describe methods of murder that match perfectly with physical evidence found at places he provided under oath." His clinical language made even the most seasoned court officials visibly uncomfortable. The most damning thing the doctor said was that preserved tissue from Zeke's own daughter showed signs of mountain laurel poison, which proved that he had killed her when she threatened to tell on him. Zeke's defense fell apart when handwriting experts proved that his confessions were real, even though he said his Crenshaw captors had tortured him into making false confessions. Court-appointed experts looked at the prison confessions and years of documented writing samples, like hunting contracts, church letters, and store receipts, that showed consistent penmanship patterns that couldn't be faked under pressure. Professor Williams from the University of Arkansas said, "The defendant's handwriting shows no signs of coercion or outside pressure. These confessions were written by a man who was fully aware of what he was doing and gave detailed information that only the criminal could know." When Tobias Crenshaw's detailed record showed that the family's intelligence was higher than that of many courthouse officials, the defense's last-ditch effort to say that mountain degenerates had made up evidence fell apart. As prosecution witnesses showed how Zeke had been systematically preying on people and how corruption had kept him safe for more than 10 years, support from the community for him fell apart. Families who trusted church leaders to keep their kids safe were angry when Deacon Hartwell cried and said he had ignored several warnings about acting inappropriately with young girls. Customers were angry with store owner Williams when they found out that his business records had helped track Zeke's planned abuse of his own daughter. Elder Thompson said during his testimony, "We all contributed to these crimes by being willfully blind. Our bias against the Crenshaw family almost let a monster get away with it because we couldn't believe that evil wore a Sunday suit." The jury only took 47 minutes to reach a decision. They found the defendant guilty on 7 counts of rape and 2 counts of murder, as well as kidnapping, child abuse, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Judge McKinn's sentencing statement, which is preserved in full court transcripts, called Zeke's crimes the most depraved acts in this county's history, committed by a man who perverted Christian authority to satisfy monstrous appetites. The life sentence at Arkansas State Penitentiary drew approving nods from spectators who had initially defended the hunting guide. Their change from supporters to advocates for maximum punishment showed how horrified they were by evidence they could no longer deny. Members of the Methodist Church were especially shocked by Mercy's quiet testimony about her father's religious reasons for abuse. They had praised his biblical knowledge during church discussions. 6 months later, Justice was served when Zeke died in his prison cell after being beaten to death by other inmates who had learned about his crimes through a guard's deliberate revelation of court details. Prison records showed that his killers included fathers whose own children had been abused. This was poetic justice that satisfied mountain codes that were older than Arkansas law. The warden's official report said that the defendant's death was the result of natural consequences of his crimes becoming known among the prison population. This language recognized community justice while still following the law. Telegraph news of Zeke's violent end made its way to Newton County, where families whose daughters had been hurt or gone missing while he was protected from prosecution were quietly happy. When Governor Donay gave the Crenshaw family official awards for their role in solving several murders that local authorities had not properly investigated, they went from being social outcasts to community heroes. The family gained permanent respect when Tobias Crenshaw was named a volunteer deputy sheriff. His detailed journals were given to the State Historical Society as examples of how citizens can investigate. People who wanted to know how mountain justice had worked when legal systems had failed because of corruption and bias made their homestead a place to visit. Mercy Harmon moved in with the Crenshaw family and later married a local carpenter. Together, they raised 4 children while she worked as the county's most trusted midwife for women in difficult situations. The case set legal precedents that changed how Arkansas looks into crimes against children, especially in remote rural areas where traditional authority figures might be the ones who commit them. Newton County made it mandatory to report suspected abuse, and church groups all over the state made it a rule that there had to be more than one witness for any private interactions between adults and minors. For decades, the County Historical Society displayed physical evidence from the case. This served as proof that evil could be defeated when courage came from unexpected places. Community volunteers burned Zeke's cabin, but they kept the Crenshaw homestead as a monument to the idea that justice serves those who refuse to let the truth stay hidden in the shadows of the mountains, no matter what their social status or religious reputation is.